Hi everyone, I'm Dean LaFerla and my guest today is Dr. Josh Grill, who's a professor of psychiatry and human behavior and also neurobiology and behavior. And Josh is also the director of UCI Mind, which is our Institute for Memory Impairments and Neurological Disorders. So welcome, Josh.
Thank you for having me.
So let me first start off by asking you a straightforward question. You study clinical trials, which themselves are studies. Why is it important to study clinical trials?
We study clinical trials, which are indeed a very specific type of study, most often a study where we're testing a drug in people who have a disease or in whom we're trying to prevent that disease. And basically, the only way we improve medicines for people with any condition is through clinical trials. They're the gold standard way of testing whether a drug is safe enough and effective enough for use in clinical care. Clinical trials vary in their length based on their purpose and the phase of development, and it's making a lot of news now that Alzheimer's disease trials can take quite a long time. For people who have dementia due to Alzheimer's disease, if we're testing a drug to see if it can slow or stop the progression of the disease, we typically think about those studies lasting 18 to 24 months. But that's the time that an individual enrolled in that study would participate. And so to do a study of 1,000 patients who are each followed for 2 years can take 5 or 6 years. And many of us feel it's imperative that we find ways to go faster.
And why does it take 5 to 6 years for a drug?
So there are lots of reasons that clinical trials take a long time. Sometimes they're delayed in getting started, but the single most consistent barrier to accelerating clinical trials is how long it takes for us to recruit people into our studies. Recruitment is a ubiquitous challenge, essentially in every area of medicine and certainly in essentially every clinical trial for Alzheimer's disease. We really struggle to get enough people into a study as quickly as possible to answer the scientific question.
So that's somewhat surprising when you think about how many people are impacted by Alzheimer's. You would think that clinical trials for Alzheimer's would go a lot faster, but yet it's still a challenge.
It really is, and as you point out, there are more than 5 million people with Alzheimer's disease in this country alone, so you would think we'd fill our clinical trials quite rapidly. There are a number of reasons that that's not the case. Most people aren't aware that clinical trials are being done and that they need participants. Of course, in Alzheimer's disease, some people don't know they have Alzheimer's disease. So awareness is kind of a double-edged sword for Alzheimer's disease clinical trials. Then, if people are aware of the studies, many people unfortunately are not eligible for our clinical trials because of the scientific need for these studies. We have very strict inclusion and exclusion criteria, so there are certain things a patient must demonstrate to be in the study. There are certain things a patient cannot demonstrate if they're going to be in a study. And so the funnel gets narrow fast. You think about awareness, you think about eligibility, and then not everyone wants to be in a clinical trial. Some people have, unfortunately, what I would view as misconceptions about the way research is done.
So you talked about awareness being a problem, and you created a registry which is called Consent to Contact, or C2C. Can you expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, so one of the reasons that recruitment is slow for all areas of medicine is that when we're doing a clinical trial, we basically go out and try to recruit people once we begin. We go out and try to find people, invite them to be in the study, make them aware. And one prominent idea right now is, well, what if we had a lot of people who we already knew about, who already had information about, who we could invite in bolus when we start a new study? And that's what a registry is. It's a large repository of people who have said, I like what you guys are doing. I'm willing to hear about studies if there's a study that's right for me and that I would want to be in. And that's what C2C is. It's a very large repository of people who've consented to be contacted about studies being done at UCI.
So if you were advising someone, a family that had a loved one that was suffering from Alzheimer's disease, about when the right time would be for them to participate in an Alzheimer's clinical trial, what would you tell them?
I talk to a lot of families with Alzheimer's disease, and this is a prominent disorder that's affecting more and more people. I tell all families essentially the same thing. If you're worried about this disease, you want to get a diagnosis as early as possible. And if you're worried about this disease, the best thing you can do for yourself, your family, and mankind as a whole is to try to get involved in a clinical trial. Again. Thanks.